Another Draw's Physics presentation. Sort of a shout-out video of sorts, and where my thoughts on Jeff Yee and his Particles of the Universe. Did a series of videos, and they probably should get more views than they get. I mean, it's a very elaborate, detailed, well composed theory. I don't I don't entirely get it. Okay, I mean, I'm not convinced. Because it's sort of based on this idea of an ether and waves, and I do have a thing against waves as being a practical representation of what we see in the universe. Just because everything to me, what I see, is a bunch of rays. Little rays explain light and how the forces radiate, and this idea of ray waves doesn't, it's not really, doesn't really work for me. It didn't really work for Feynman either, I don't think, in the sense that he kind of didn't like the idea of attempting to describe these elements as something that doesn't spread and goes through something and it never deteriorates in terms of it waves, and yet the wave never, when waves usually are in tension and they are destroyed by that tension, they usually, the energy is absorbed by the tension. So lots of subtle little problems. You can, unlike everybody else, I get nitpicked to death, and everybody else kind of gets a bye, and that's, but the downside is I get a little more action here than some of these other places. So there are lots of conversations to have about these different models, and so I do intend to do more videos. I mean, I want to do one to the Hilster particle model about the whole charge subject, because I don't think they're accounting for nearly enough. So I'm sort of I've watched Jeff's summary video a couple of times, and it's dependent on a lot of physics I'm not too keen on, quarks and positrons and neutrinos and nucleons, whatever nucleons are. A bunch of elements that I think are not real players in atomic structure. They're synthetic creations in accelerators, and they don't really exist as real parts of the automobile. They're just smashed together. There's fender and whatever back seat smashed together, and fender and back seat, when you pick it up, the fender falls apart from the back seat, that kind of thing. They're not meant to be together, and so that's why they decay so rapidly. I mean, none of these particles found in the accelerators are particles that last, that survive outside of the accelerator, outside of the moment of their creation. And so it seems to me kind of obvious that they're not real things. They're synthetic things. And certainly they could be real in the sense that you can create a complex system where you create something for a millisecond and then create something around it that keeps the structure. Magnets are like that. You can create an arrangement. As long as you create other magnets to hold those magnets in positions, you can create an arrangement that wouldn't be sustainable if it wasn't for the environment you have it in. And so I'm not saying none of these things are real. I'm just saying that I think it's probable that most of them aren't real parts. So anyway, there's a lot on pentaquarks and tetrahedrons. I think it's four-sided pyramids, three-sided pyramids. Well, anyway, I should know these details, but anyway, and then some spin is in there, and so you have something spinning, creating waves at certain periods, and so it's all quite complicated. And in terms of just there's lots of little parts moving and doing things to account for everything. And but I guess every theory that is new to someone is going to appear more complicated than maybe it is. And so maybe some people think because I have two kinds of photon, the plus photon and the negative photon, essentially, that are all the forces. Maybe that sounds extraordinary and just because it's new as an idea of polarizing force. But anyway, I don't want to make direct comparisons between our two approaches to answering the questions. I guess I'm sort of looking for some similarities, and they're just kind of not as abundant as I had hoped they would have been in some respects, just because he's conceding the role that all of these exotic particles play, where I think their role is minimal, and I think the real important structures are just electrons and protons, and I think neutrons are basically just a proton and an electron. That's really what atoms are made of. And I guess the part that it does connect well is the idea that atoms have geometry. Whether they have all this motion inside of them is something I would be doubtful of. I think they vibrate. The bits are always in tension and they're always shuddering. But I don't think they're doing this spinning thing. Because I don't think that would really work for atomic bonds. I don't think it's this whole idea of shared electrons. When the electron is, leaves town entirely, I just think that molecules would fall apart if the electrons could disappear for a while. It's not really shared anymore. But like I said, there's so much you can go into the details of, how do you explain this experiment, how do you explain that experiment. So anyway, the point is, I would like to have another conversation with Jeff, and we can go over some of this stuff when I have regular, what do you call those things? The regular services. There's some other word for those. Utilities. When I have utilities again. We're supposed to get big snow starting tonight, and they cut the tree yesterday, but they sat in the driveway all day. The tree guy sat in the driveway all day, waiting for the power guy. Nothing ever happened. So very efficient. But anyway, no sign of them today. So I might be out of luck for another 3 days or something. For the snow coming, that's just not working for me. I'm not too pleased. But anyway, side issue. So anyway, but yeah, it is hard to, familiarize, become familiar enough with all the principles involved. So the basic idea is that I think he's saying photons don't really exist; they're just wave functions. I think. But he's saying basically the force elements are all just the waves that these wave center things, these ultimate little bits, whether it's neutrinos or whatever it is, the little bits that combine to create the bigger bits, and then the bigger bits create bigger bits. And they all are capable of reflecting and emitting waves. And so the idea would be is that when waves are out of phase, they neutralize and end up with less force. And when they constructively meet, they create a higher amplitude wave, and that wave creates the idea of repulsion. Now, I don't think you create enough repulsion or attraction that way to account for things like magnetism. Maybe you can account for gravity that way, but then I think, well, then you end up with a conservation problem, because you really can't create more coming out than went in. So again, it sort of gets back to my argument that I think my polarization explanation is better, just because you have the same amount coming in and going out. It's just that the two things' sensitivity to what's coming in and out is changed, which makes it have more of an effect. That's an annoying bit of noise. So yeah, I think I still think my model explains everything quite adequately, so yeah, I'm going to be a hard person to convince. But compared to the standard model, um, I see lots of elements that are better formed than in Jeff Yee's explanation than is formed in the standard model, because they don't really deal with any details either. His does, they don't, in a sense. They don't provide explanations. They just say a virtual thing, or a thing that, like dark matter or something else. They invent something that's a theoretical solution rather than a actually observed somewhere in the real universe solution. And many of these exotic particles sort of exist that way. They don't exist as something they found in actuality. They just found a lot of circumstantial evidence that indicates that thing probably exists. But it's just footprints, and it could be a lot of animals that made it, that kind of thing. So, the fact that he's putting real geometry, and another thing, he does provide a lot of math, new math. It sort of looks like the old math. It's just the variables are different and represent different things. And to me, it's all quite strangled, from my perspective. It's a very unappealing math, because the math doesn't do simple things like 1 + 1, equals 2. And it's not, I like math that actually had numbers in it instead of math that just has letters in it. I wish people would put actual numbers in their math. It might make the math bigger, but at least why bother with the c squared thing? Put the real number in, put the real numbers in, and then we'll figure out what we're missing and get a better idea of what this number is going to look like, in my opinion. I think there's, like I said, I like Jeff. So, and he's really a nice guy, and so I like talking about physics, but yeah, I don't think he's knowledgeable enough about my theory, and I don't know if I'm completely caught up enough on his to do anything useful in terms of. I think that I can ask him a few questions about, like I said, the magnetism issue. Just how do you account for the extreme amount of attractive energy created? Because I don't think you can account for it as merely being a doubling of an amplitude of a wave, that kind of thing. So I guess the other part I like about his theory is in the sense of this, or even these kind of ether theories, is that they sort of account for the fact that everything is creating this radiation from its jiggling, and it's that radiation that's creating a bunch of field pressure that's causing things to is creating a circumstance where you can create a lack of pressure in between two things and cause them to migrate towards each other because of all the noise that's in the outside world. So if the outside world has a bunch of noise, and you can create environments where you can create a circumstance where there's an inside that's quiet, that kind of thing. So you create an external pressure, a membrane that pressurizes your internal environment in a new way, where you can interact, differently. So anyway, so probably enough. Like I said, I wish I could say something more definitive, because it's, like I said, I really can't dissect all the math. That's going to, that would take quite a while to go through every one of the equations and say, oh, well, you forgot about this and you forgot about that. Or, you're just making a parallel between their math and your math and just changing this variable and blah, 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 or some kind of crap like that. So I just don't see that happening tomorrow. And the idea is, sort of, they've found a new pentaquark thing, and so he's using that as the, and I just think using anything they say as a foundation for what you say sort of is suspect automatically for me, because everything about, in my opinion, their approach to physics is wrong-headed, and so they're, especially if there's not really hard evidence for this new discovery, um, uh, grain of salt and such. I don't think it's going to be a good foundation, because it's going to be built on bent space and crooked frames, and lots of cheats, and electrons that move through time, and all kinds of crap like that. That I don't think is a rational foundation for physics. So anyway, link below. To the summary. You're probably not going to get the summary unless you watch some of the other videos entirely. But anyway, it's obviously a good piece of work. Good kit. He's done his job, at least in a sense of going through a lot of detail and dealing with a lot of pieces of the reality. Whether they can hold up to hard scrutiny, like I said, some subjects I just don't think it's there. Gravity and magnetism, for example. But we'll see. And so we'll see. Maybe we'll see what the future brings. See if we'll maybe have another conversation. I guess I would say that almost my preference would be to focus on how poor regular physics is, than to argue each other's models. But I mean, I like to argue my model, but it's easier because I know mine. And I guess that's the point: is that his is complex enough that I just don't know if I can do a competent job of deconstructing some of the elements. But we'll see. Maybe I can. Anyway, link below and such.